Vitaly Morocco.
Roman Zoric.
Marina Zolatova.
Witold Ashuruk.
Maria Kolyesnikova.
Marina Karabanova.
Sergei Melyanets.
Nikolai Statkovich.
Alexei Berezensky.
Zhana Lagutina.
Igor Losik.
Anatoly Kudlasevich.
Andrei Preskurin.
Polina Svedstova.
Roman Zoric, engineer, age 37, August 9, 2020. We came to review the vote result. It was about 7:55 p.m. There were approximately 10 people, plus the head of the precinct election commission in the gymnasium hall. Then riot troopers began to enter. They detained one person, then a second. I think I was the third. I wasn't frightened at all. But they came over to me and seized me by the arms. I said, I can go myself, man. They loosened their grip, ushered me into a van. From 8 p.m. to midnight, we sat on the bus. And right at midnight, I don't know if the vote result was posted near the school or not, but there was a ruckus. And in response, the bus set off. When we arrived at the Okrestina Street prison, all normalcy ended. As prisoners, we were thrown face down on the floor. I saw a man lying naked on the grass, asking for help. At first, I thought he was drunk, but it turned out he had been shot. Nobody helped him. There were many people. It was a continuous conveyor system. Undress, off with your shoelaces, line up. People entered the cell, the door closed after them, that was it. Screams were heard on the street. They were beating people out there. We sat there for the longest time. Our cellmates were all quite mature, educated people. They decided to ask what we were being held for. They called out to the guards, said, first, tell us our status, why we're here. Second, give us some food. And third, we must be allowed to call family and relatives. And through the feeding trough in the door, we got other cells to agree that if the conditions were not met, we would begin to raise a racket. We gave them half an hour to fulfill our demands. The guard promised he would pass our demands upwards. Half hour passed. Then a crowd of policemen came running with the guard. They opened the adjacent cell. We looked through the feeding trough to see what was happening. People were being taken out, hands behind their backs, faces to the floor. We were on the second floor, and they marched them down the corridor, down the stairs, and out into the street. On the way, they beat everyone with clubs. Prisoners ran outside, knelt down, heads to the ground, hands behind their backs. The police continued hitting people with their clubs, and we were next. On the third day, they began taking us out of the cells. The judges had arrived. It was trial by conveyor belt. The judge looked like a talking head. He gave everybody 15 days. There was no point in resisting when you're a hostage and helpless. So what happens next? I've heard, and I heard Viktor Babariko said it. He said, Lukashenko is not the system. It only holds together thanks to the people who are willing to carry out his instructions or orders. When there won't be enough of these people, when people stop obeying his orders, then the system will collapse. It's already begun to crumble. The domino principle has been set in motion. It took 26 years to build, although I say 26, it adds 70 years of communism to that. We do not choose the times in which we live, but we choose the path that we will walk. 26 years ago, I was 13, 14 years old. This was the time of the first elections in independent Belarus. The people were immature. They didn't yet know how to make choices. They didn't know what a choice was. People were given the right to choose, but they did not know how fateful that choice could be. They didn't have the experience, and they chose what they chose. Later, they just turned a blind eye to many things. They thought someone else would come along and decide everything for them. People now have the conviction that they are the only ones capable of improving their lives. I think now we will appreciate that.
Vitaly Morocco, logistics specialist, age 40, August 9th, 2020. I was relatively apolitical. I never took part in demonstrations and never actively expressed my civic position, but things boiled over. The entire 2020 presidential campaign unfolded in such a way that it was impossible to remain on the sidelines. How long can you continue to be an armchair critic? My entire family came to the conclusion that the time had come. It was up to us to take our fate into our own hands, to make a choice about how we would live in the future. After the polls closed at 8 p.m., my son and I went to the school to witness the announcement of the final results. We waited a long time, but the voting results were still not posted. At about 9:30, the members of the precinct commission left under the escort of police officers. They never did reveal the results. We knew that people were gathering at the Steli Hero City Obelisk in Minsk. We headed toward the city center with a group of angry people. There were about 500 of us. We were met by riot police as we approached the bridge on Kalvarskaya Street. Our column came to a halt. There were many young women among us. I tried to keep my son behind me. At one point, the wall of policemen began banging their shields together as they moved toward us, trying to force us back. We tightened our ranks and fought back. The stormtroopers weren't expecting that, and they stepped back. They stepped back and they sprayed tear gas as they retreated. So each time we approached them, we found ourselves in the midst of a cloud of gas. I felt an unpleasant taste in my mouth and a burning sensation in my eyes. People began to scatter, and when I saw my son running, I ran after him. Suddenly there were loud explosions and bright flashes of light. I remember the events at the hospital only in snippets. I was met by a team of doctors. I was labeled patient number 2. I was impressed by the well-coordinated and efficient work of the medical staff. They treated me as if I was one of theirs. The doctors unleashed a string of obscenities. They could not believe an injury like this could happen in peacetime.
Marina Zolotova, journalist, chief editor of the Tutbai internet portal, age 43, May 18th, 2021. I have never doubted that our country has a wonderful future ahead of it, because Belarusians remain Belarusians among Belarusians. Throughout this year, so much good has been revealed to us about ourselves. We will never again agree to be slaves.
Sergei Melyanets, election volunteer, sales manager, age 40, August 10th, 2020. On the evening of August 10th at 6:30, my older brother and I resolved to go to the center of Minsk. We would find a place to pray for Belarus and the current situation. Then we learned my younger brother was going to come, so We planned to meet. His wife's brother also came along. We drove to the Minsk concert hall. We hadn't even had time to start when I saw black-clad riot police running towards us. There were 20 of them. They grabbed us by our arms and by our heads. They pulled us out of the car. They forced me to kneel, and they began beating me with clubs. They screamed and yelled and shouted obscenities. Their purpose was to humiliate me. They constantly tried to find out what we were doing there, what our plan was, who the organizers were. And I answered honestly, and I said, well, we came here to pray. And then one stormtrooper continued to harass me. Why did you come here? It was all very crude and full of obscenities. And I said, I'm here with my brothers. And that we came to pray and nothing more. And at that moment, I felt this shoot of electricity through me. He had tased me with a stun gun. At first, he tased my feet a couple times. Then my arm, my back, and then the area of my heart. And I've had heart problems since childhood. Mitral valve prolapse. I didn't know what to do. My answers didn't seem to satisfy him. Every wrong answer, and he tased me again. It was very painful. We ended up some corner somewhere. I don't know where it was. They brought in new detainees. It was a holding place so they could later transport the detainees in another vehicle. And a huge vehicle was parked there. And we were lined up against the wall. They twisted my arms behind me. They lowered my head at a 90-degree angle, and then they used a club and they spread my legs wide as possible. And I remember one riot trooper saying to me, if they'd let me, I'd burn you all alive. I can't forget that phrase. I would burn you all alive if I could, or if I got an order. I prayed right there in that holding place. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was a spectator of some sort. Everything was happening to me, but at the same time, I was watching it happen from a distance. I mean, I basically couldn't understand how I ended up in this situation. Nothing like this ever happened to me. At the same time, I understood. If God had allowed it, then that meant there was a reason for it. I did not know then where they took us next, but later I learned it was the Lenin Police Department. A woman in an unmarked uniform interrogated us and wrote down our information. I asked permission to call home. I explained, I have 7 children, and she promised to let me call later, but those words were empty. They handcuffed us, took us to a room resembling a garage where they put our heads against the wall again. I stood, forehead against the wall, and I began to feel like there was no air. That my heart began to ache. I'd never felt anything like this. There was no air. And I began to float away. I began to faint. I said, pardon me, I'm sick. I have a bad heart. And I had been tortured with a taser, and I'm getting very sick. I shouted at a policeman, and the policeman was afraid I might die then and there. They brought in a doctor from the ambulance to examine him, and the doctor said, quick, get him in an ambulance. And they told the riot police I must be taken to a hospital, but the riot police didn't want to let me go because they had no one to accompany me. And finally, the doctor says, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if he dies right here on the spot? Well, the ambulance took me to the hospital. There was a huge number of people who had been injured in the demonstrations. All were wounded in some way, some with fractures. They put me on a drip, and they put me in the corridor. And finally, the doctor told me that my condition is stabilized. No more rooms available. I should go home. I am a religious person. And I know that one can't experience true joy until one has experienced true tribulation. My family and my children are the only thing helping me cope with what I went through. Only at home am I calm, and do I feel safe. You know, I've noticed how people change. Most people change, at least in my circle, they've changed for the better. A friend of mine on Facebook wrote, I was beaten. I was tortured. I was sent to prison. I was in a very bad state. I was angry and I wanted very bad things to happen to those who had done this to me. But then I realized that if I were led to the man who beat me, and if I were given total power over him, I would not so much as touch him with a finger. Jesus Christ, as he hung on the cross, asked his heavenly Father to forgive those who had crucified him, for they knew not what they did. I do not know if those riot police knew what they were doing, if they were in their right and proper minds, or whether they were thinking in a clear and sober way. I do not know. But I have chosen not to hold a grudge against them in my heart. And you might say, I have forgiven them. I do not wish to seek revenge against them.
Maria Kolesnikova, musician, age 39, September 7th, 2020. I was kidnapped on the 7th of September in the center of Minsk. Many of us knew that such crimes were happening, but this incident displayed the full cynicism, lawlessness, and criminality of Belarus's police force. In order to preserve the power of a single individual in the center of Europe, they subjugate dissidents to kidnappings, beatings, torture, and murder. These crimes are anonymous and they go unpunished, but the individuals standing behind them have very specific jobs in specific state structures. I will now speak their names aloud. After my abduction, I was dragged by force into the office of N.N. Karpenkov, the head of Gubopik, the Belarusian Special Police Forces. He yelled, insulted, and threatened me. In his office, two other gentlemen, G. Kosakevich, First Deputy Minister of the Police, and A.U. Pavlyachenko, head of the Operations and Analysis Center, engaged me in what we might call a conversation. One often sees these men in the official media. They delivered an ultimatum. I would either leave the country, and once abroad, I could do whatever I pleased, or they would throw me out, alive or in pieces. They would break my fingers and shut me up in prison for 25 years, where I would sew shirts for the security forces. The conversation lasted several hours with a rest break in a solitary cell. I got an eerie feeling from the smoky, dim, dark corridors with portraits of the old man staring down from the walls among showcases with pennants, flags, and other KGB artifacts. He felt as if he had been transported into an old Soviet film. Our riveting conversation lasted late into the night. Among the many questions they had, they wanted information about me, who was the author of certain texts. Why do I assert that the election was falsified? On what grounds did I claim that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya won? Had I, in fact, organized unauthorized mass events? Had I attempted to interfere with the work of state entities? Was I connected to the Niekta portal or the goals of the Coordination Council? Did I understand that I was the one who bore responsibility for those being beaten and killed, not those who gave the orders? These and other topics truly amazed me. They really believe that there are puppeteers, that forces outside the country are trying to influence the situation in Belarus, and that those who take to the streets are criminals, not peaceful Belarusians. Here's what the authorities are up to. They crack down on civilians. They beat up their own people. They move to repress and imprison all those who at least somehow participated in the election campaign. These are crimes. The authorities do not hear the will of the people. They cannot accept the idea that the Belarusian people want a different life, are ready for change, and take responsibility for their own future and the future of their children. We are Belarusians. We are a full-fledged nation, not just an assemblage of people. We live in the center of Europe, not on some random chunk of land. And we can change everything. You are incredible. I reread Varlam Shalamov's Kolyma tales about the Soviet prison camps. Much has changed since then, but the key element has not. The deprivation of a person's freedom is, in itself, severe punishment. And the system, as it has done before, seeks to deprive humans of their dignity. But no matter how difficult it may be, one can always find the strength to remain human. I do not for a moment regret my decision to remain in Belarus. I do not fear criminal persecution or prison. I am absolutely certain that those committing crimes are the ones who must be afraid. We are strong, brave, and wise. We are together, and love. Love is stronger than fear.
Alexei Berezinski, entrepreneur, 35, October 16th, 2020. On March 8th, I usually get in my car, drive to my friend, the florist, buy 200 tulips of different colors, and then set off on a marathon, delivering flowers to my mother, to my wife, her sister, my mother-in-law, my brother's wife, my daughter, and many others. In short, every man will understand me. I like seeing the women smile, and they always smiled at such moments: spring, sun, and tulips. But something went haywire this time around. There was no buying flowers, and the weather was horrible. Although throughout almost 5 months in prison, I hardly saw any weather at all. I know you are very worried about me. Don't be. If this is the price of freedom, if this is what's fated for me, I can handle it. There are almost no criminals here. Everyone here understands. Perhaps they understand even more than those who are still free. They think prison bars will intimidate Belarusians who want to be free. But no one here is going to be reformed by any bars. How can you imprison an entire nation? When you are incarcerated, you don't think about yourself. There are others here who think about me. They wake me up, they search me, they give me food, they search me again. All our thoughts here are about how you are doing out there. What grades is Varvara getting? Will Marian and Styopa make the football team? How are things at work? Is our groundskeeper Vasily Ivanovich okay? You often ask how you can help me. The answer is simple. Do everything we used to do together. If things are good with you, then my mood will be much better. I know that for certain it's hardest for Mom. Her state of mind after the trial may have been the most difficult moment of all these 5 months. Ma, let's agree on this. I eat well in here and I wear my hat if the weather is cold. And you try to worry less, okay? In short, my lovely women, I wish you all a happy Women's Day, March 8th, here on the pages of New Hour newspaper. I realize that right now, not just my women are smiling less. They stole the spring from us, and we will remember it for the horror it was. But I know that very soon the time will come when there will be lots and lots of smiles all over Belarus.
Marina Karapanova works in the information technology industry, age 32, August 10th, 2020. We finally got home on August 10. We were able to connect to the internet, and once again, we were horrified at what was taking place. That evening, my husband's brothers came to visit. Together, we decided we had to go to the city to help people any way we could. We left our apartment house and got into the car. We saw a bunch of young men running through the courtyard with stormtroopers chasing behind them. The young men disappeared, but the policemen continued searching with their flashlights until they saw us. They began kicking and beating on the car with clubs. They beat on the windows. We unlocked the doors and they pulled us out violently, then dragged us to a van. I tried to explain that we hadn't done anything, that this was our apartment building right here. Our neighbors had seen us. Our neighbors backed us up by shouting that they knew us, but that did not stop our attackers. I did not know where we were being taken. Nobody explained anything. They immediately led me into a room. A man entered. He cut off my white bows and ribbons. He made a show of discarding them. I asked if I could call my parents. I explained that my parents are retired and my mother is disabled. He said I couldn't do that, but if I admitted my guilt, I would be home tomorrow. Next, a woman came in and took me to another room. It was the famous blonde Christina, the stormtrooper with a ponytail. She ordered me to completely undress. She made me squat naked. She constantly accosted me with humiliating comments. After I got dressed, she took me into the corridor. There were men there completely naked. They were kneeling with their foreheads to the floor. The walls and floor were covered in blood. That is the moment I realized how serious everything was. 33 more girls were brought into our 4-person cell, which already held 20 people. We couldn't breathe. We asked them at least to open the feeding trough, to which the famous blonde riot trooper replied, "You won't croak." At night, we heard people being beaten. The men were forced to sing the national anthem. One guy howled, calling out to his mother for help. From time to time, they marched us out of the cell to count us, hands behind our backs, facing the wall. During one of these outings from the cell, I mustered the courage to approach a policeman. He held a list of the detainees in his hands, and I wanted to know where my husband was. He leafed through the list for a long time. "He's not there," he said. "Then where is he?" I asked. "He's either in the prison as Odino or a hospital," the policeman said. I was seized by fright. At one point, I realized they could spray gas into the cell and nothing would happen to them for it. They had complete carte blanche. I was extremely worried about my parents. But as it turned out, some girls who were let out of my cell phoned them and said I was fine. I had already been there for 4 days. There was no trial. At 11 or 12 one night, we were told to leave the cell. They led us through the corridors. There were dried bloodstains on the wall. A man in a balaclava sat in one of the offices. He was in charge of ideological work. We were given a paper of warning to sign. What is this article? I tried to clarify. I do not know all the articles of the criminal code. They didn't like me asking a lot of questions. You want to get out? Sign the paper. Of course, I didn't want to sign the document, but my husband and family were on the other side of the scale. That outweighed everything, and I signed. They released me. A few hours later, my husband was also released. It was one of the most touching moments of our life together. I was terrified of how he would come out. He had gone through much more than I had. As he said, young men were coming out of there with their lives ruined. 2 months after I was released, my father, who was a healthy person, an athlete, had a heart attack. Dad is now gone.
Andrei Preskurin, employed in the sphere of information technology. Age 29, August 8th, 2020. On August 11th, we went to the Pushkinskaya metro stop, then to Kamenaya Gorka. We stood in the parking lot near the Materik hypermarket. There were no chants, no slogans, none of that. A medical volunteer stood nearby. He had a red cross sewn on his shirt and many medicines in his backpack. Later on, this guy was arrested with me. We heard grenades exploding across the way on the other side of the intersection. Minivans filled with security forces drove up suddenly. Everyone ran to their cars, but the police immediately blocked the exit from the parking lot. Men in green uniforms jumped out of the vans. As I later found out, these were officers of the Almas, or Diamond Detachment. They ordered everyone to turn off their engines, but my friend must have had an adrenaline rush. He decided to pull a Steven Seagal and back his way out of the parking lot. But they immediately trained their rifles on us. I realized things were bad. I knew just how everything was going to turn out, so somebody had to cool things down. I jumped out of the car and started asking them what I should do and how. I talked a mile a minute because I served in the internal forces and I know what you do in these situations. You need to talk like crazy so they start thinking and don't have time to get their fists or anything else involved. They needed to be slowed down. Passwords, secret codes, who paid and how much, they shouted at us from the minivans. They said each of us had our price. $30, a bottle of vodka, a pack of cigarettes. They asked how we got around the blocking of the internet. It pissed them off. They were stunned. They took us someplace and threw us in a police van. They bent us over, spread our legs, and dragged us off. I was met in the van with blows from clubs. They shouted at me, and when they beat me, I couldn't make out what they were shouting. And they quit beating me, and I asked, "What?" And in response, they beat me a second time around. They threw me into a 2 or 3 place personal carrier. There were already 5 of us there, and then the troopers began pushing a rather big guy into the vehicle. He didn't fit. They couldn't close the door. The troopers began tasing him with a stun gun so he would somehow squeeze in with us. The guy howled with pain. We tried making ourselves smaller, almost climbing to the ceiling so we could climb in. Upon arriving at the Augustina Street prison, we heard shouting. We ran to the wall and kneeled. We were selectively asked who worked for whom. Someone said they had received $2,000. The stormtroopers went berserk. What else do you bastards expect from us then? Some detainees replied they were freelancers, and the cops laughed. They apparently thought this was a low-skilled profession of some kind. When we were already in the cell, we heard new detainees being brought in and beaten. It seemed to go on forever. Days passed. We were no longer beaten, and basically everything was fine. Our overseer was a good man. He offered us bandages and helped whomever he could, because the doctor at Augustina Street was A0. When some guy was brought to him with a badly battered leg, the doctor said, "Oh, it's a bruise, he'll get over it." The court sentenced me to 11 days in jail. I realized I got off easy. It was much easier for me than for others. Many have not been released yet. I'm lucky. I just grew stronger. People from the IT sphere have a different view of things. We're not afraid of losing our jobs, our desk, our 500 rubles. These are people who know their worth. They know they can go to another country and feed themselves there. Most of the people who did not come out to protest stayed home because their livelihood depends on the state. They didn't want to risk losing their job, then not be able to find a new one. IT people don't have that problem. There are pluses and minuses to this, because most of the resistance turned out to be either from the IT sphere or from females. Everybody knows you can leave anytime you want, but no one wants to leave. I often have thoughts that they might come for me at any moment. If we can't change anything, then we'll have to leave. It's mentally very hard to stay here and watch this happen every day. This isn't life. It's a kind of masochism. It would be too easy to believe that change will come quickly. But you have to hang on to the belief that things will change. We've passed the turning point. So now we just need to be patient.
Nikolai Statkovich, politician, age 64, May 31st, 2020. Please don't worry about me. I'm fine. I feel good. And I'm sure none of this will last for long. I worry about those who are free. All the more so because they have begun killing people right in their own courtyards. Still, there's news. The investigation was finally completed. Sergei Tikhanovsky, Andrei Sokov, Dmitry Popov, Vladimir Tsiganovich, and Igor Losik will be tried with me. All of us are charged under Article 293, Part 1, for organizing mass riots. Additionally, all the accomplices, except for me alone, are charged with other articles of the criminal code. The essence of the crime is described in the charge in an extremely verbose and confusing way, but it may be briefly described as follows. Our criticism of the authorities on the internet brought about an increase in people's readiness to protest, which led to the gathering of an unorganized mass of people who engaged in riots. As such, we are the organizers of those riots. Logic. got the impression that even the authors of this masterpiece of legal prose themselves had not yet realized the colossal breakthrough they had made in the development of the legal profession. Such incredible prospects open up instantly that it takes your breath away. Now, anyone who has ever criticized the authorities over the course of the past 15 years, the statute of limitations for extremely grave crimes, can be accused of organizing mass riots. True, there won't be room in the prisons for all the criminals, so they began with small groups. I guess we can only be proud that we were chosen first. I suspect this legal breakthrough will attract the attention of the entire world. We should soon expect delegations coming from Venezuela, Iran, Hong Kong, and elsewhere to study our cutting-edge practices. Belarus is finally a world leader in something. But the main thing is already clear. A spiritual revolution has taken place in our country. A lump of intimidated egotists suddenly turned into a united, freedom-loving society. But this transformation was the result of gradual, profound societal changes that took place over a long period of time. A spiritual revolution in a nation will inevitably lead to political change. The people will win.
Anatoly Kulisevich, poet, a prose writer, bard, age 59. August 2nd, 2020. There was a reason I met Sergei Tikhanovsky. I had followed his A Country for Life blog for about a year. I worked in television and radio, so I'm not just someone off the street. I understand a thing or two about this topic. I would watch his streams and think how politely he handles himself in front of the camera. He doesn't put himself out front. He lets others have an opportunity to speak. I tried contacting him for about 3 months. I felt he needed to change the format of his meetings with his supporters. He would arrive in a city, people would just come out and talk to him, but he needed to incorporate poetry performances, songs, organize exhibitions, to give all these events a cultural sheen, to give them a more national color and flavor. Then one morning, out of the blue, I got an answer. We can take you with us. And so I went off with them. We went to Mogilev, Gomel, and Grodno. It was in Grodno that a planned provocation took place right before my very eyes. It was not the first time these two women had ensnared Sergei in some way. I saw 2 policemen running towards us. Apparently there was a false call from these bimbos. I can't call them anything else. The video shows the policeman walking directly towards one of these women. She points her finger at Tikhanovsky. He didn't answer my questions, she said. People surrounding Tikhanovsky managed to create a buffer between him and the police. And as I stood there with my guitar, I saw a policeman fall down. His shoulder stripe lay beside him on the ground. A man standing next to him said, "I saw the policeman fall down and tear off his own shoulder stripe." It was all planned, a shameful, lowly provocation. I assumed they might follow me, but I am already of such an age that I fear only God and my wife. They arrested me on August 2nd. At 9 a.m., I went out with my dog for a walk, and they seized me right on the street. I didn't have my phone with me. I realized there are other ways to track a person, someone without a phone, but I was without it, and without any documents. But they knew precisely where and for whom they had come. I believe this was done preemptively, a week before the main day of voting. We knew the elections were legitimate. People had come out to protest. The authorities were shooting. We knew some factories had gone on strike. We really hoped all the factories would grind to a halt. Had everyone stopped, had everything stopped for 3 or 4 days, had no one come to work, this regime would no longer exist. I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe that would have been too easy a victory for us. We've been resisting for half a year now. Belarusians are uniting, thus gaining inner strength. You can compare it to a fire in a peat bog. This is not my metaphor. I myself am from Polski, near Turov. But a peat bog smolders, and smokes. After a while, a whole village may sink into the ground. It's the same way here. Of course, winter is coming. It rolls in on you. You talk to friends and you meet dog owners in the street. That's it. They'll arrest everyone now. People are afraid, they say. What are you afraid of? Did you kill anyone, bully anyone, steal anything, defraud someone? What have I to fear? Let them be the ones to fear, those who break the laws, who beat people, who kill and steal. Let those who build extravagant palaces for themselves be afraid. Why should I be afraid? I walk under God and before God.
Igor Losik, blogger, 29, June 25th, 2020. Hey, finally received your letter. My health is fine. Mentally, things are worse after the latest news. Searches, prison sentences. The journalists of Belsit were just sentenced to 2 years. I am absolutely shocked. As such, I have no illusions. I think I'll get 5 years and it will break me. I have no more desire to do anything. I've already done so much and all of it was in vain. It had no effect on anyone. Honestly, I think it's unlikely that anything will change. They did the main thing. They dragged things out. It's been the standard practice over the last 27 years. And once again, no one was ready for it. As such, everything will go down as it always does. Everyone will be thrown in prison. The rest will either leave or calm down. Russia will help financially, and that will continue for several years. So I'm just trying somehow to prepare for this. Because I'm sick and tired of waiting for things to get better. When every week for the last 8 months, it has only gotten worse and worse. Then, when it seems it can't possibly get any worse, it gets even worse still. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's sad, but that's how it's going to be. For now, I see no reason to think otherwise. I don't want Dasha to see or hear the verdict at the trial. It would be better if they just shot me quick so I wouldn't have to see any of this.
Zhana Lagutiva, a typography worker.
Polina Zvezdova, temporarily unemployed.
Ages 49 and 21. August 9th, 2020.
If we could go back to August 9th now, I still wouldn't be able to stand by and watch election observers being beaten and arrested for no reason.
That's how we are. I can't just walk by if my neighbor's being beaten up. That's how I was raised. That's how I raised my child. The only thing I worry about is the girls in our cell. They have long lives still ahead of them. I've already seen a thing or two. It's pretty hard to break me. They thought they could break us, but they couldn't.
On the contrary, it only made us more angry.
It made everybody angry.
In our region, everything began on August 9th at 8 p.m. The police car drove up and then a police minivan. Nobody had any fears that they were going to arrest us. I mean, for what? The principal was the first to go out.
No, it wasn't the principal. It was the head of the lower grade instruction. She went out and she pointed to the observers. Then a bunch of troopers in black came running out to the van.
And began making arrests.
And beating people.
And I'm running around shouting, "What are you doing?"
And I was running around shouting.
I started shooting it all on video. I was shouting, "You bastards, I'm filming all of it." Then I felt someone bearing down towards me, and that was it. 8 men carried me off. I thought, yeah, not bad. A 9th man was carrying my purse that they had ripped open. They threw me in the back of a police van, screaming, "Throw that bitch." And then I heard my mother screaming, "That's my daughter. Take me with her." So we both ended up in the same van. My stepfather came running to try and save us, but they grabbed him, twisted his arms behind his back, and threw him into a personnel transport.
They carried him off and beat him to a pulp right in the police vehicle. We were among the first to be detained on the evening of August 9th. Everybody in our cell had been taken from a polling precinct.
I especially remember that moment when they started to bring people in from the Stella Obelisk. From Nemiga Street, one guard put a guy on his knees and said, "Welcome to a tolerant country, you animal." And wham, wham, you could hear the thuds of a club. It was very scary.
Nobody slept when the men were brought in. It was impossible. They screamed so loud. When they took us out for air in the corridor, we saw the floor splattered in blood and urine. The walls were all smeared. They made the men wipe everything down.
We signed our release papers on August 10th, late in the evening. I asked the hulking man standing over me, "Will you really release us if I sign this?" The document said that I was allegedly detained near the Stella Obelisk because I shouted, "Freedom to political prisoners! Long live Belarus!" "Of course we'll release you if you sign it," said the policeman. Like a naive fool, I believed him. I mean, I'd never been in such a situation. Okay, no big deal. I signed it. And I happened to see 2334 in there. I didn't know it at the time, but that was an article in the criminal code. "Okay, I'll sign," I said. Then they took us to cell number 18 on the 3rd floor. There were already 20 people in there. The floor was wet. It turned out that periodically they'd open the door and splash water on the floor. There was no air to breathe. Everyone was suffocating. Then everything was repeated as before. More shouts, obscenities, and beatings. I had no idea men could scream like that.
The trials began August 11th. They all happened at once, quickly, as on a conveyor belt.
I went first. My judge was the notorious Tatiana Motyl. She read out my protocol, which said I was detained in the area of Kalveriyskaya Street and Nemiga Streets. I was surprised because just the day before, on August 10th, I had signed a protocol stating I was allegedly detained at the Stella Obelisk. I said I didn't agree. I definitely did not sign that protocol. They let me out of the office, but they returned me soon enough. Now there was a new protocol, which I signed under pressure from a policeman. I added that I was detained with my mother, who suffered from type 2 diabetes, and they didn't feed us or give us any medicine. In the end, the judge's verdict was a fine of 20 monthly salaries. But they didn't let us go. They took us back to our cells.
Some of the girls were removed from the cell on August 12th. Polina was among them. I remained in the cell.
30 women were put in a van and taken to the prison at Jodino. The escorts that accompanied us were decent people. They asked us if we wanted to eat or drink. They gave us cookies and Coca-Cola and water out of their backpacks. They asked us not to tell anyone what they had done for us.
Another official came in around lunchtime. There were girls in the cell who'd not had trials yet. They still had to sign their protocols. "Who are you? You're not on the list," said one of the policemen. "I was just walking by. I was brought here with my daughter. I was fined yesterday, and I should have been released," I said. "Here's the paper from the prosecutor, a warning about criminal liability in the event of a second detention." "Oh, yeah? Okay," said the policeman, and he led me to the exit. I found my bag of things. He stood me facing the wall near the exit, and then this blonde, Christina or Karina, I don't know, came by. She began beating my kidneys and my legs. She put me in a chokehold and she said, "So did you have a nice walk with your white ribbon?" How could she do that? The other policeman there says to the blonde, "Let her go already. She confessed everything," and he began to pull her off me. "I will endure this," I said. I think to myself, I will endure just a few more steps before I get out. And then they released me. And I didn't know where to go. I didn't know that my husband had already been released. My husband had been beaten all over with 2 head injuries. His back was covered in red streaks. No space was untouched.
A woman in uniform came into the cell at the Jodino prison and asked us what our prison sentences were. "I basically just have a fine," I said. "What? What are you doing here?" said the policewoman. "Ask whoever brought me here." The woman listened to everyone's stories. She began to cry. She said she would call the courts and find out why we had been brought here. I was released. The light hurt my eyes, and there were people everywhere. I was utterly exhausted. I didn't understand where to go or what to do. And then I heard my mother's voice. "Daughter!" And I ran to her. We hugged and cried.
Psychologists advised us to take a ride around Minsk on the way back. This day, women were just standing and they were holding flowers, and Polina burst into tears.
There were so many people, and all of them so beautiful. They stood with flowers and signs. "Oh, Christina is Auschwitz." There was support now. Fabulous. We knew nothing about what was happening outside. We thought that everyone was probably just sitting at home. We figured all this had frightened them off. And then you think, what happens next? When I arrived at Okristina to pick up my things, I discovered that 2 of my rings were missing. Thank God my chain with my P initial was there.
Sometime after the beating, my husband suffered several epileptic seizures. Epilepsy appeared on the basis of traumatic brain injury, but now he seems to be normal.
At first, I was frightened to walk down the street. I feared staying home alone. I went and spent nights with my friends. Whenever I went walking, I was constantly turning around. I thought they were going to arrest me again. Maybe I had looked at someone crosswise, maybe said the wrong thing, crossed the road in the wrong place.
All the girls in that cell became family to me. They're just like my children. The girls there were wonderful. Nastya Baklanova, a real fighter. She was so worried that she finally had to leave the country. And Yulia Golinskaya, she was detained 4 times. And many others. It's awful. Beautiful, smart, assistant professors, incredible girls. I was so frightened for them.
For what I experienced. For this incomprehensible detention. For the bullying, the bruises. For Mom, I will never in my lifetime forgive them for what they did to my mother. I will not forgive this inhuman Christina or Katerina or whatever her name is.
I want a real international trial. I believe they should be punished. Forgiveness? I don't know. I mean, to be honest, do they need my forgiveness? I don't think they do. I think they go berserk day by day. They aren't interested in my opinions or the opinion of their loved ones. Nothing interests them.
I will never forgive them. Ever.
Witold Ashurek, social and ecological activist, age 50, September 19th, 2020, May 21st, 2021. My dearest mother, I received your letter yesterday before lights out, and I read it over and over again. It's short, it's just a few words, but it was so emotional and heartrending that my heart aches to read it. I miss you too, Mom. People are wrong to say you don't need a mother when you are an adult. I remember everything about how you raised Andre and me, how you wanted us to grow up to be decent people. Right now, it is very important for me that you be healthy and that you be joyful for your children and grandchildren. It happened as you planned. You brought up Andre and me well. Nobody will ever dare accuse your sons of being thieves or crooks. On the contrary, I was sent to prison precisely because I told the truth and encouraged others not to make peace with bullies. Mom, had I not led the revolution in Lida, I probably would never have been able to respect myself. And if you no longer respect yourself, how can you expect others to respect you? Whoever would respect us, Belarusians, if no single person among the 135,000 people in Lida had been willing to take the responsibility of rising up in defense of the truth? Mom, people respect me. You raised me correctly. Fortunately, there are marvelous people among us, and they have supported me wholeheartedly. Now that I am temporarily in prison, they support me even more. They send me letters and postcards, send me packages and money. They subscribe to newspapers for me, and they pray for me in all of Belarus's cathedrals and churches. I receive so many letters, I'm barely able to answer them all. I'm even suspending my study of English so as to answer more letters. They write to me from Berezovka and Lida, from Grodno and Minsk, from Brest and Vitebsk, from Mogilov and Gomel. Belarusians who have emigrated but still worry about their homelands. They write to me from Great Britain. They write me from Belgium, Finland, and the US. There are even Brazilian Belarusians. Yesterday evening alone, I received 17 letters. They send me telegrams of support. The whole world is proud of us and supports us. I hear from Catholic priests in Minsk and Vitebsk who wish me happy Easter and write of their support and admiration for our refusal to make peace with lies. Mom, people respect me. You raised me right. I am certain that people in the streets of Berezovka say the same thing to you. Remember, Mom, make no mistake, I will come home. Be strong, Mom. Have faith. I will not spend 5 years in prison. Change is coming. It will bring freedom to me, and it will bring me home to you. Remember, Mother, I will come home without fail. Big, big hugs. Your son, Witold.